You're listening to the Yeshiva of Newark podcast. I'm your host and curator, Rabbi Avram Kivelevitz, and I hope you enjoy this episode. If it's Erev Shabbos Kodesh, hey Shvat, this must be Rischa d'Oraisa. I'm here with Rabbi Yosef Gabriel Bechelfer and Rav Meir Schiller. Last week's program, it struck a chord by many of our listeners, and I was encouraged to look at something that was available on the great Gush Etzion website. And it was there that I was able to find an essay by Professor Samuel Lebens, who is an associate professor in the University of Haifa, an essay about Rav Shamshon Hirsch, and specifically the issue that we were talking about. And I thought it would be a good link to a broader issue. He mentions, as you did, Rabbi Schiller and Rabbi Bechelfer, that so much of today's Torah world doesn't seem to be in line with the real core principles of Rav Hirsch. As he says, its Torah is supposed to shape its adherents into warriors of love and justice towards all people and guardians of the natural environment as well. Now, this was something that we didn't emphasize that much in our Sekira, a Ketzara about Rav Hirsch, but I know, Rabbi Schiller, that is mentioned often, the beauty of the natural world, and we all know the Memra, mein Schweiz, the Kadosh Baruch Hu is going to have tightness on you if you don't really recognize the beauty and understand the great, beautiful world that's been given to us. But Lebens zeroes in on this, and I'll quote from his article here. To offer another example of the gap between the ideals of Rabbi Hirsch and the reality in which we live, in the state of Israel, the use of disposable cutlery and plastic tablecloths has become heavily associated with the religious community. They tend to have bigger families who eat together more regularly than others might, and host a large number of guests on a regular basis. Religious communities also tend to organize, among themselves, social care for members in need, and this requires people to cook food for others, in addition to their own family meals and hospitality. Moreover, pressure on people's time, especially given their large families and their hospitality and social initiatives, often coupled with the lack of resources to pay for the assistance of a cleaner, creates a strong incentive to spend money on disposables, since the relevant cost-benefit analysis seems to render the expense worthwhile. This association has developed to such an extent that when Israeli politicians propose a green tax on these goods, it is decried as religious persecution. To read Rabbi Hirsch's account of Jewish law, by contrast, one couldn't imagine how such waste and low regard for the natural environment could be deemed compatible with, let alone characteristic of, a halachic lifestyle, despite the various pressures within such a lifestyle that might explain the temptation to use such products. Rav Meir, I know that you also were taken by it. Do you think Professor Lebens gets it right?
By and large, I think the answer is yes. Of course, going back to the 19th century, awareness of ecology, or as they called it in those days, conservation, was not nearly as widespread as it is today. So if you want to put forth this question, you say if Rav Hirsch was transported into an era in which there was much greater awareness, I'm sure there's no question that he would see the destruction of the ecosystem as inexcusable, that servants of God would not destroy his world. But on the other hand, as in all such issues, to ask why in much of the Torah world there is no Ein Kol V'Ein Oina and all of this, the answer is there is no world. The world doesn't exist, just as the rest of humanity doesn't exist. The oceans don't exist. The water system doesn't exist. Nothing exists. Nothing exists outside of their world. Now, if anybody proposes anything which might in the slightest way inconvenience them, so therefore he's in war. He's fighting against them. He's a warrior against their way of life. But in your overall question, absolutely. How can a person who's concerned with Hashem as the creator of the world, who's concerned with the future of humanity, not be concerned with the massive destruction of the ecosystem affected by man?
I'm almost reminded of that 5-year-old boy that you spoke about last week. You almost feel that there's almost an idea that when Mashiach kimt, of course, the world will be chayzer to the beautiful, pristine, Gan Eden-like world, right? In other words, I should care about what I throw into the ocean, or I should care about the fact that the landfills have more plastic bottles and more plastic bottles. L'maisa, when Mashiach came, the world will be closer to such a great, beautiful state. It's a great Stiltut.
I quote Rabbi Schiller from an article he wrote in 1989 in Jewish Action. The lack of a common stake, or at least cultural trust, in America has left its citizens to become the primary victims and ultimately missionaries of a crass, hedonist, exploitative, capitalist consumerism. End quote from Rabbi Schiller. So Rabbi Schiller back then in 1999 already was decrying that evidently not just the Gentiles, but also the Jews in America have become victims of crass consumerism. And I can't imagine that he believes, or any of us believe, that since 1989, situation has gotten better.
Did I miss something? Is this a different show? Because I was asking you specifically about the use of these disposables and things.
Well, of course, that's crass consumerism.
Look at the way Lebens frames it, though. He frames it because of necessity, because of the fact that there's so many children, and they have to, and the cleaning is impossible. And he's talking about Israel, not about consumerism in America.
It's the same thing. Isn't the same phenomenon in Israel? Because we can afford it. Back in our day, when we were young yeshiva students, back in the Eretz Yisrael, they would throw away disposable. They would come, my great aunt would put we'll watch the disposable, use it over and over again, right? But we become affluent, we become hedonist, we crass consumerism, and therefore, again, to quote Rabbi Schiller, right, this has made us victims of our own success. By the way, the name of Rabbi Schiller's article, if somebody wants to look it up, it is on the web, on Rabbi Dr. Yitzhak Levin's website. It's Forgotten Humanism, Rabbi Samson Fall Hirsch.
Now, look, I appreciate what you're saying, Rabbi Yosef. They have more money, but it really avoids the point. That's not what Lebens was talking about. Yes, there's reasons why this maybe should be what we are after. In other words, by the Haredi Welt. But what they've done is shunted aside Kovod Ayoim, Kovod Shabbos, Kovod Simchas. I say in this regard a story, and I don't blame my daughter-in-law about this. But I remember, we hosted my children and grandchildren a number of beautiful Pesach Storim with other people. And my wife and I would work slavishly to bring out the Pesach dishes that we had, the Pesach china. And one year when my daughter-in-law came over, she announced to us with great simcha that she had brought this beautiful Chad Pami, this beautiful Chad Pami plates and silverware.
My in-laws do the same thing. They used to use their precious china and silver and have to spend the whole night washing dishes after the Seder. I don't see it as covered yontif. If you can afford to use plastic, use plastic.
Come on. I mean, you before we get to whether this is really the Spitz environmental avera of using plasticware, you don't think that it shows more covet to have things that...
No, it shows more covet to be able to go to sleep.
I hear. Look,
you only say that because you're a man and you won't stay up and wash the dishes. It's not that subjugates the women on Pesach, so they have to work hard after the Seder is over. Yeah.
This is subjugation of women? Subjugation of women? That's what it's about?
Or men, if they have to stay up and wash the dishes. It doesn't matter. Men also, it's the same thing. Usually it's the women who stay up and the men who go to sleep because they clean after more davening in the morning. But men too. That's what we do it.
Even according to your model, which I refute, think about it for a second. You have a dish, you have a plate, you have a beautiful bowl, you have things. Maybe it can be that type of. You can't get that type of thickness. You can't get that type of multiple use out. You can't get the craftsmanship. All of that is part of covet. It's not so much, this is much more expensive. The expense is a siman to the quality. The expense is a raya. Obviously, you look at something that is a beautifully done thing. This is the whole idea of Leil Pesach, is to basically be medama yourself to what is considered fancy and elegant.
Sorry, I can't relate to that. Maybe I'm too much of a yekka. I can't relate to that. To me, it's all about having to stay up extra time and to wash the dishes. And it's antithetical to the idea of being b'nei chorin, if anything. Because b'nei chorin means you don't have to actually wash the dishes. And you're advocating this tremendous avodah which somebody has to do after the Seder. To me,
you know what? Why are you looking at the seif and not the essence? Bismano, you're putting onto your plate.
There's always a piper to pay. You have to pay the piper.
You're putting the brisket or which me'ain, the korban pesach, whatever, on something that's going to get tossed out.
Doesn't taste any different what it's put on. They make very elegant paper plates nowadays.
At my Mirza Hashem daughter's wedding to be, Rabbi Yosef, my good friend who shows up and dances and brings his jump rope and all the other zachen over there. And then my daughter gets, as a matana, a wonderful package of disposable, nice plasticware that she could use for Yom Tov. What would I think of that gift? Isn't the sign of a chashuv a gift, meaning what you want to put on your table for the Rebbeinu Shalom? Look at Shulchan Aruch about how you're supposed to mechabed Shabbos and Yom Tov.
If somebody is going to wash the dishes, that's fine. If I'm going to give you something which is going to make you more work, now, happens to be, yes, women appreciate China for reasons which are beyond my capacity to understand. But in the meantime, the people who use plasticware don't have that. They have my sense of aesthetics, not your sense of aesthetics. And therefore, they're fine with the plasticware. Now, is it crass consumerism? Is it we're heating this because we can afford it? Yes. Okay, we can afford it, so that's how we do it. Is it the right thing to do? No, but that's what we do.
I think Rav Meir, who's a little bit older than me, I think understands the philosophy or the mindset that I have about zachen that are been around. And you're right, you need to wash them and carefully pack them. But what beauty you have when you take that out. I mean, we have a Seder plate that Baruch Hashem we have for almost 40-something years. And I hope, Mirza Hashem, to leave it to my children. And I hope that they'll say, oh, this was the Seder plate that the Tata genitzt. All of that, I think, is very, very significant. And I think that is lost in the Chad Pami situation.
I think we've entangled several issues which need be disentangled. One is the question of the effect of the environment, of plastic and other items on the environment, which is what we started with. And then we went to the issue of, is it more bekovedik to have plates as opposed to plastic utensils and plates? Then we went to the Schwerigkeit for the Vav and for the Kinder and whoever's washing them. We went to that issue. And then each one of these different issues has a different weight to be attached to it. And now Rabbi Kivalevich has added a third, which is the nostalgic linking of generations in items that have been in the family for a long time.
Dear listeners, when we sit down to record an episode for the Yeshiva of Newark Podcast Network, we're always mindful of one thing: who is listening and why they keep coming back. We know that you're not just tuning in once. You're coming back episode after episode, and that tells us something important. It means our conversations are resonating with you. That kind of impact is humbling, and it's also a responsibility. Producing content that's thoughtful and accessible takes real effort behind the scenes, from professional editing, production, fact-checking, distribution. Each episode represents an enormous commitment. This has been a free service, complete access without any paywalls for over 6 years and counting. I'm reaching out to invite you to partner with us in sustaining and expanding the Yeshiva of Newark podcast platform. Your support will ensure that our existing podcasts continue at a high level of quality. Listeners have told me that they rely on this content day after day, week after week to stay engaged. Every program has a clearly marked link that you can click on to donate for any amount. I want to thank you and our friends from the IDT Corporation for helping make this possible and for being part of an open-minded, Masorah-conscious, Geschmack Hakarai, sprinkled with authentic lumdus community. I'm Avram Kivalevich. Thank you.
Listen, how much weight you're going to attach to each one of these issues. I'll just mention as an introductory story here. There was once a young man in the square who was a Talmud Chacham Yerushalayim, and whenever he made a simcha in the shul, which is where like the brisket and bar mitzvahs were made, he would bring from his house regular plates, dishes, and silverware, which he transported his own, schlepping it in a wagon and schlepped it home. And I'm sure he washed it. I know he wasn't home. I'm sure he washed himself because he felt that a Sudas mitzvah needs the cheshivas of plates and dishes. But I think Rabbi Bechhoff would allow for that if in a case where he's doing the washing and transporting himself, you would certainly allow for that. Listen, how much weight we attach to polluting the environment, how much weight we attach to not making life too difficult for wives and children. These are all varied questions. I can't weigh in on them. On the overall question that we kicked off, though, which is the environment, the plastic pollution is an important part of contemporary pollution. It's an important question, though, plastic pollution.
I agree. I agree. It's a big problem, the use of plastic disposables. I'm just explaining why, it's pragmatic perspective, it makes a lot of sense, and that's why it's going to be very hard to get rid of it.
Not only do I feel that it's a pagam in Kavod Shabbos if you can get away with it, despite whatever the cost is. The second thing I would say is that I think in this argument that we're having is somewhat reflective of the machlokes Rav Moshe Feinstein and Chacham Avadia about the use of chad pami cups for kiddush, for netilas yadayim, and other things.
Well, I'd say Rav Avadia, it's also Tzitz Eliezer. They're both Mekel. It's not just Achenu Asparadim, it's also Bnei Ashkenaz.
Granted, and of course, but I'm saying Rav Moshe, I think, reflected some of that older generation when he talked about how can you have something that's meant to be tossed. When you have something that is a cup that's meant to be tossed, then that takes away the chshivas of the shem kais.
But again, at the time that Tzitz Eliezer and Rav Avadia Yosef, like I said before, and this I think perhaps relates to the machlokes between Rav Moshe and Shlomo Zalman about shulam bones. So the time Eretz Yisrael and American cultural differences. In the time of Tzitz Eliezer and Rav Avadia writing the Tshuvas, they washed chad pami in Eretz Yisrael. Those cups, those got washed and used again.
And again, it could be that also the fact that there is that change between Rav Moshe, who's, despite the fact he's they're contemporaries, he was from a different door, and I think the world did change. They said, we treat this as a kais, despite the fact that it does get put into the into the garbage disposal or wherever, into the trash bin, because it is a kais. This is what the Welt looks like as a kais, which I guess is reflective of the fact that whether it's consumerism, the way you, I think, incorrectly stated it, or the fact that we are a culture that has lived more on disposables in general. And maybe that's because we've shrugged about the environment, but the Welt has changed. And I think because the attitudes have changed of how we view cups and plates and these things, I think because of that, the halacha will, even Rav Moshe might be moida given the landscape of today. But let me ask both of you. Both of you seem to agree with Dr. Lebens that this is like a real salvo against the environment, the use of plasticware. The whole idea of environmentalism is such a difficult thing to wrap your head around because there's so many aspects of how we are saving the environment. Would you say, Rav Meir and Rav Yosef, that a family that decides to buy, because of perhaps cost effectiveness, a gasoline car, is also guilty of, and Hirsch would also be against that environmental destruction? Well, would you say, okay, I could have bought a Prius, or I could have bought a complete electric car, and I went with a gasoline car because it's at this point difficult to handle and I can't afford that? So am I also an environmental killer? Am I also someone who is showing a crass disregard about God's world?
Look, according to the Reim holds that the mitzvah say to use things. Every time you throw out a plastic bottle, you're being without the mitzvah say, because you actually use the bottle. And I wrote about this in my article in Tchumin about recycling many years ago. There's some crass.
Yeah. I was waiting for it. Listen, you started with a nice Aniva quoting of Schiller, but we're just waiting for you to to bring forth your own reference. Go ahead. Yeah,
anyway, so the Shaila is you're never allowed to throw out a plastic bottle because you can get married so chava, so low, so gross. So obviously, there's circumstances where we throw them out, where we don't actually put them in the recycling bin, and because there are various different. He speaks about it when. It's not considered to be about tashlis. And the bottom line is that there may, when for reasons of convenience, which are significant, one doesn't do the ultimate in recycling or in multiple uses of an object. It's okay. Okay, there are other cheshbonos. Electric vehicles, we know that there are other cheshbonos as well. This takes a little. We just rented an electric vehicle for the first time when in California recently, and it's a problem to fill them to recharge them. If you don't have a dedicated recharging unit at home, it could take hours and hours to recharge them, a long time, and it could take a long wait, and you're afraid of running out on the road of your charge. So there are cheshbonos which will
so what about Leban's cheshbonos for the Frum Welt? Somehow those aren't as good
I
as
agree
your
with those
cheshbon?
cheshbonos. I think that it's a complicated thing. It's not so simple. I said before that even though it is something which we only do because we can afford it, and we are a hedonistic society, there are cheshbonos like the washing dishes, which do come to account. It's a complicated thing.
So sometimes the personal cheshbon is sometimes overrides the chiyuv that we have to this planet.
Of course, it does. Yes.
Okay. So let me ask you again. You said that you flew out to California. Okay. Air travel on vacations. Should we also, in terms of the way Lebens looks at things, that, this goes against the Hirschian ideal of protecting the planet. And if Lebens is right, then we need to question not just the Haredim who are using Chad Pami, but we also have to question all the trips to Eretz Yisrael, the vacations that we take, all these things which are damaging the environment.
Right, you should question them and realize that vacation is something which is special. It has to be something which is special, which is required for a person's mental health or for the shalom bites or whatever else the case may be, and do it on that basis. You're correct. One should not be flippant in this regard. Should bother you more the Rosh Yeshiva who are flying on private planes, gallivanting from place to place when they could have gone first class. Are you going to defend the Rosh Yeshiva and the Rebbes or not?
Look, I obviously I was on your side. My point is, this is a Pandora's box, but I think that it's such an inexact way. How do you know how you're damaging the environment, Rav Meir? That's my question. There's so many actions that we do. You're right. Throwing plasticware is something that we can see. Go out to Staten Island and look at the fresh kills, and you can see all the landfills, and you know where it's going. But there's so many other things which are docoustic to know, right? How about the fact that I didn't get solar panels? It's so hard to figure out this area, this thing that we're saying from Rav Hirsch, that we must protect this planet and we have a responsibility, the Rabbanu Shalom's Bria, of the L'Shamra. How do we know how to put that into effect? There's so many steps where, is this environmentally conscious? Is this not? Is this going overboard? Right? Turning the air conditioning on. These are all things which ain't davar saif. I'm not saying, like you said, Rav Meir, that we close our eyes and expect Mashiach to come and, like the good fairy in The Wizard of Oz, change everything, back into the way everything was. But I think this is an area that we can get entangled, as you say, and I think it's hard to find a derech. So how are you a Hirschian environmentalist b'chlal in this Welt?
What I would say is that there are so many areas of life-threatening pollution in the world today. The wildfires in the West because of drought, and the rising sea levels, which may eventually engulf all these garbage dumps on Long Island. Many species are threatened. These species are necessary for biodiversity. There's so many water pollution. There are so many areas that are real. So, what does a person do? What does a person think? So here's the first thing I would say, rule of thumb, that anything which emanates, any shita which emanates from the Republican-based Trumpists, as well as from the baseless Haredim, anything which comes from those two environs is suspect, because the Trumpists are forever involved in trying to protect in some way the super wealthy. And as we said before, the Haredische Welt has no larger existence outside of their own world. So those two are stam aufgefragt. How much we should worry about the other things? Okay. So man darf mal ein sein. Governments have tried to prevent a lot of these things, help a lot of these things. Some of them are really at a dangerous point. As every summer you have some dangerous wildfire in the far west. The water supplies are increasingly polluted. So I think we have to take counsel with people who know what they're talking about in these areas, and then try as best we can to translate it into our own individual lives.
I don't know which organs we use as representative of pure science, but do you believe there's a consensus, on what the environmental level should be? on when are we considered dangerously destroying the planet? Is there a scientific consensus on this?
This is not my area of great expertise. I've engaged in some superficial reading of the subject, but certain things seem not to be contested. I mean, global warming, the melting of the ice caps, it seems not to be contested. But real experts should be consulted. Plus, again, you get to the From Welt. They're not just involved in major use of plastic materials, but enormous amounts of garbage. You should come here on our streets in Monsey, or my streets, not Rabbi Bechav's necessarily, but my streets in Monsey. The amazing amount of garbage that goes out 3 times a week. So again, I would think there has to be something done here in terms of just simply the amount of space and pollution occupied by garbage. Now, again, if you have a lot of children, there's going to be problems with a lot of this. But certainly somebody somewhere in all the minutes, hours spent by the Me'etzes Gedolei HaTorah debating every possible issue on the face of the earth, there might be a panel there at the next Aguda convention on polluting the Earth's environment.
Listen, the bottom line, which what Meir is not saying, but was clear from emerges from his words, that the Hasidic bittul for Olam Hazeh, which is also permeated the Litvische Welt, is one which says that environmentalism and regard for garbage and all that type of thing is something which is insignificant. Even though there are contradictory elements in this, because the Strymos nowadays are Olam Hazeh
is not big enough to contain the Strymos. There's no room left.
Right, so there's no consistency necessarily in this regard. But there is.
How about the fact that the Strymos are perhaps preying on animals that might be in danger?
I'm very glad you made that point, because I think there is another point on the table here when you talk about the physical world, that the Heimische Welt does not have any pity on the animal kingdom or the reptile kingdom. That in Monsey in general, we often see these days families of deer walking around because they've been dispossessed by the rapid expansion of homes being built here, and they're wandering around trying to find something to eat or drink for their kids. The cruelty shown by children to the ducks on Lake Suzanne, the chasing of cats to frighten them. So there is this general, it's not just indifference, there's almost an arzorius in terms of the animal and the animal world.
My good friend who lives up in a farm in Sullivan County talks about the Hasidic kids that come by, and when they see the chickens, they said, "Oh, do get the kaporas, oh, sure. The kaporas." Right? The chicken is not really a chicken. The chicken is only a kapara.
I would say, when you get to kaparas, I'm not going into should we do the meeting, shouldn't we do it? But there has to be some sense that these creatures are terrified by the experience, locked up in cages and swung around.
Which is, by the way, by those of you who want to check out Leben's essay on the Gush website, that's the second example that he gives that Hirsch would have been very disappointed with, and about the way the animal world and the shchit specifically, the cruelty that goes on, and the way the animals are penned and shechted. This is something which he feels is antithetical to Hirsch's philosophy.
Sure, I go a step further, and this is a bit more of a romantic gesture, perhaps, but I think it's based in, you see it in Tehillim and elsewhere, the disconnect from the natural world bichlal, the awe and inspiration of a winter starry sky, or a beautiful sunset, or a snowfall, everything which has inspired poets for thousands and thousands of years. Again, the Yeshiva Welt, the Hasidic Welt does not have this. They don't have a sense of the unique beauty. The Hashemayim Esapim Kavod Kel, the Sumar Amenechem, Urim Mibara Ela. They don't have it. So that's another. It's not just practical. They're lacking the soul connection to the Bria.
Meir, let me push back a little bit on that. This Natzlus might be in the sprawling cities that you mentioned before. It's so difficult to takasi shamayim. When you have a Lakewood or a Monsey, that even though you're right, had you take away so much of that buildup, you would be able to see Kechavim. But man in a different era, spent half of his life staring up at the beauty of Shamayim and saying Mi Bara Ela. Today, because of streetlights, because of fog, because of smog, because of everything, we are not taken when we walk home at night from shul. We can barely, it isn't clear, it isn't translucent, it isn't beautiful. And I think that's part of the problem. I think that when a world that was in dark, but was in the dark stage of the Kechov and the Mazolas, it had to affect them. Even if they didn't have electric lights to be able to learn more, but they had to, even when they looked up to be Nispoil from the Rebbeinu Shalom and the Welt that he had created.
Yes, well, I think Rameir, though, was right in this space, because Dov Landau just a couple of days ago made the following statement. This was sent to me by a good friend of this program, Reb David Haida. He said that L'natzel et kol hasakranut hativit, to use all one's natural curiosity, ach v'rak l'divrei Torah, only for divrei Torah. V'yesh harbei ma limtzo b'Torah, and there's a lot to find in Torah. Zeh hader shekibalnu b'Rabbeinu Zatzal b'chol haderis. This is the derech which we see from our Rebbeim in all the generations. Grak lios shkuim b'limud haTorah, only to be immersed in learning Torah. So, no. I disagree with you, Avram. I wish you were correct, but that's not the case. There is, and I think that Rav David sent me this, asking me, my opinion about this, and I said he's right. She does so. Even if individuals can inquire into other areas, the educational system should not encourage it. Sakranut tivit, from the perspective, is not something to be encouraged, but to be channeled. If there's an individual who can't channel it, so then we have to deal with that. But the yeshiva Welt today is of the opinion, I don't think this is, like he says it's Deirei Deiros, which I see means going 3 generations back, that is this has been the derech as cultivated by the Olam Yeshivas to negate and suppress and at best rechannel Sakranut Tivit.
I would agree with you completely, and I would only add, as I have a few times in this program, what does that do for our image of Almighty God? In other words, his vast universe was something created just as a trick to deceive B'nai Yeshivas and Haimish Eden to do things they shouldn't be doing. What an extraordinary, I don't want to use the word satanic or demonic view of the Creator. What a trickster. What a nasty trickster he is.
Does not apply. Maybe once upon a time, or maybe for people not B'nai Torah, but not for B'nai Torah.
And why did God make beauty? It's such an extraordinary rephrasing of their whole worldview. Beauty is insignificant. The beauty of the Creator is insignificant.
I think, Reb Dov, you say Lishitosam. I'm going to say it's Reb Dov Lishitosai specifically, because if you look at his Torah and you look at where he's going, he taka has an incredibly fertile, creative, and sakranut in everything, in learning, and the fact that even now in his mid-90s, his faculties are immense, and I'm the spoil about his Bekias, his Hekif, and he is taka finding tremendous areas of interest in Weiter and Nochazach, which really shock you, because he's able to make your head spin in terms of his of the wealth of his Yedias. And many times, and this is not defending him completely, but many times we look at the world in the glasses that are reflective of ourselves. By him, maybe it's a bracha that we don't get disturbed by the startling stars in the sky. Maybe because this way, but the point is, in that Welt, that's where his mind is going. And I will just add, I'm sure he believes that he's being, and I have no doubt that it's what's beating in his mind and heart, is that he's being dovik to the Rebbeinu Shalom. And you're right, Rav Meir, not a Rebbeinu Shalom who created an incredible world of beauty and power and immense to be despoiled from, but still the Bashefer of the Welt, the creator, the one who Rab Dov is hoping to be mistabik with Achar Meir Vestrim. So he's not less of a spiritual person. His spirituality is of a unique sense. And I agree with you, Rabbi Yosef. They probably look at people who care about the natural world as, well, nebuch, they can't use that sakranut in Torah, so let them become scientists or let them marvel at a museum.
It's good for Goyim, maybe. For the Goyim, it's good. Rabbi Kittler, I've just said the following, that obviously all human beings are created differently. There are people who are specialists in learning, specialists in davening, specialists in chesed, specialists in sympathy to human beings. And we can't all be specialists in everything. But what we can do is not denigrate the other aspects of Avodas Hashem. He's not saying this is my path, but there are other paths. He's saying this is the path.
I agree. In that sense, I am being critical of him, but I understand why he said it, because I understand him. I've seen his learning, and I can see, for him, there is that other rivosh to go into. There is that incredible diuk to rediscover.
That's true. I just want to point out, going back to our original perspective, as Hirschians, we believe that Sakranut Tivit is something which should be developed and encouraged, and it makes you a better Oved Hashem, right? Yes, Reb Doiv's perspective is understood very well from the way you're explaining it, but again, we differ in philosophy.
I wouldn't say it's a kasha from Hirsch to Reb Doiv. So, and the Rambam already, you know what I'm saying?
From Almighty God, forget about Hirsch to the Rambam, from God Almighty, his creator.
You know, Rav Meir mentions the concern towards the animal world, and we know the disdain most Haredisha Jews have in Eretz Yisrael for the cats that are considered a pest there. But the animals that are pets, however, this is something which it would be almost a psul and a shidduch, wouldn't it? The idea of holding an animal and keeping an animal as a loving pet in your family. And you actually see that in the Tshuvas Be'er Moshe in the early 60s, when someone came to Rav Moshe Stern with the shaila that he was in Manhattan, and he was invited to a luxury apartment in Manhattan, and he was surprised that as soon as he entered into the house, a lapdog was picked up by the matron of the house and put into his lap. And he was told how this was their pet. And the fellow, right after Shabbos, wrote a shaila to Rav Moshe Stern, does he have to do tshuva? He couldn't believe that this had happened to him, that an animal was in his grasp on Shabbos. And when Rav Moshe Stern answers him, he said, he keeps on saying, the Meshugoyim who did this to you, who held this pet and who picked the animal up, it's clearly a sign of shigaon. And of course, he dealt with some of the mentions from the Marach or Zerua about the birds that were singing. And of course, that's so much different than holding an animal like a dog as anything except a guard animal. Has it begun to change?
It's like a smartphone and women driving. It's one of those ways you distinguish yourself as not really inside.
Do tuna beetles have pets?
Yes, sure. Once you're stepping out, you're stepping out in those areas.
But is some of it tinged, in order to keep that hisnagdus? Is there almost like a pushback against how disgusting an animal is, and how could you even have an animal?
The hardcore doesn't need to push back against anything. The hardcore is it. What they do is it, and everybody else is mishigoyim at best.
Many of you listeners know, of course, that I received a dog before COVID began, not because we knew COVID was coming. And this dog was a loving part of our family for many years, was my helpmate very much in many of our podcasts and shiurim. Dolly sat on my lap, seemingly attentively to what was going on for many, many hours. She was the only tricolored Pomeranian that finished Seder Zroyim, because she did it with me. And we had to lay her to rest right before Thanksgiving of the past year. And as we buried her in our backyard, I mentioned the Chazal in the Psikta Rav Kana that said, Vayosam Hashem l'kayin ois. And the Psikta Rav Kana says, the ois zeh hakelev. Now, besides being an incredible connection to human and dog relations, which zoologists have found very unique in the animal world, and that seems to be Chazal's understanding of that that's where it began from Cain, I felt that there was more than just a dog offered Cain protection from the people who would hate him and the people who would kill him, who would see him as an outcast. But also the dog helped Cain come to terms with himself. It was clear that Cain had a long life of regret, his jealousy, his hatred of himself, and having an animal that would look into your eyes and that would give you love and loyalty would not only allow you to love yourself, but also even to love others who seem to look at you with disdain. And I thought that in the same way, our dog, she helped us be able to look at the world, because when COVID began, there was a lot of mistrust in where I lived. There was a lot of fear, anxiety, the little units that we formed, the sort of Eingereisten Rav Meir by the scientists in a certain way, the fear of those that were getting too close. And having the dog allowed us not only something of comfort, but also I think allowed us to view the rest of the world like that original dog that was given to Cain, as a way that we could somehow look at others with compassion. And that was a tremendous gift, although, the dog, unique among pets, meets the eyes of its master and always is looking in the eyes of its master to see if it's doing the right thing. Although Dolly lost a good amount of her vision, by the time we put her to sleep, the look that she gave us, the type of feeling that we bonded with her, I think was a tremendous gift, and is the same gift that God had granted to the fallen one so long ago. So Rabbi Bechafer wants me to mention the fact that after 2 months of mourning, after I came back from Eretz Yisrael, my wife surprised me by bringing last week into our home a new dog, sort of a distant cousin of Dolly, a throwback Pomeranian, quite a bit bigger than Dolly was. We now have Oscar in our house. So having this animal and being careful of its needs and worrying about it and picking up its waste is, in a sense, again, a lesson of concern that we have to have for that world of beauty. So welcome Oscar to the Rischa family. Hopefully he'll join us here one of these days. Rav Yosef, when are you getting yours?
I don't know, maybe that you could, the way you described it, maybe you can find a heter for the yeshiva, the Charedish Welt, that it's like your service dog.
Here, we'll catch you with Hashem next week. Be well. Take care. Thanks for listening. And remember about that donation link in the episode show notes. And if you liked what you heard, share it with your friends. Today's episode was produced by me, Avram Kivelevich, with audio production from Eretz Yisrael, Artseinu Akdosha, by Ben Wallach of Experience Audio. It was edited with love by Tzvi Gordon. Catch you next time. Shalom uvracha.